Hello and welcome to the first real chapter of this course. In this one, we'll be talking a bit about anatomy. I will give you a brief overview of anatomy in terms of the relationship between human and animal anatomy, while also giving you the tools to properly study anatomy on your own in the future. Now, I cannot teach you guys anatomy and mastery of anatomy in 20 to 30 minutes. That's impossible. What I can, however, give you are the knowledge and tools to properly research it by yourself, understand the anatomical references, and know what's important, or at least what is my take on anatomy, how I use it, and I will show you some examples of that as well. Okay, so first off, let's go through some of the terms used in anatomy. Usually, medial and lateral, you'll see those quite a bit. So medial refers to stuff inside of the body or like closer to the center, the midline, while lateral refers to the outer stuff, right? So as an example, usually there would be like a little ligament here between the two bones of the leg, and the inside one would be the medial one, the outside one would be the lateral one, right? So it's just sometimes you will see anatomy references calling something the medial view or the lateral view, and you can orient yourself knowing that. Proximal and distal. Proximal means closer to the trunk, distal means farther away, so kind of similar, yet also a bit different. Right, so you will have like, I don't know, proximal muscles, again, muscles that would be closer on the limb, I guess, and distal would be farther away. All right. Then next we have these terms, which are, I think, pretty common. We have superior, meaning stuff, closer to the cranium or higher above. Anterior, meaning stuff in the front. Posterior, stuff in the back. And inferior, all the stuff below. Right? So again, just quick terms to familiarize yourself with that will help you orient yourself when you're looking at pure anatomical diagrams or something like that. All right. Next, you can see here I have a écorché. This was purchased from Flip Normals, an écorché by Dmitry Fedorov. And I just quickly went in and polypainted some of the muscle groups. Now, I'm not showing every single muscle, right? Like there's plenty of different muscles here. However, I'm just coloring them as a group so I can relate them to you on some creature designs in a bit. So you see here I have, the chest muscles, the pectoralis major. I have the deltoid, the biceps, the brachioradialis, the triceps, the latissimus, the trapezius, right? I think the names are not super important to know. However, they do help you a lot, especially when comparing anatomy references between human anatomy and animal anatomy, right? Because sometimes you might think that on a cat you're looking at a biceps, but it might not actually be that muscle, and you can then tell by the naming that, oh, it's not a biceps, but it's something else, right? So it is kind of important to know, but don't fret over it so much. I think it's most important to know what the shapes are, what the form is, and where they originate and where they attach. I think that's the most key information, is like, where does a bone or a muscle, come from, and where does it insert, right? Also, the layering of the muscles is very important. So in what order do they attach and insert into the body and that kind of thing. All right, so I'm not going to name all of them because I think that would just be boring. But just imagine that muscles are kind of like these kinetic forcers that pull and push on the body to make it move, right? So as they always attach on a bone, they will pull, contract, right? When you flex, they contract, and they will pull that region of the body forward, in this case of the chest muscle, right? So here on the arm, you have extensor muscles that essentially, when you extend your fingers, these are the ones doing the work, right? They will pull, and they will pull back these tendons, and your fingers move, into a straight position. The flexors are on the other side, and they will pull the tendons over here so that you can curl your fingers up, essentially. And most muscles, if not all of them, I believe, come in pairs, right? So you have extensors, flexors, you have the biceps, you have the triceps, and they all kind of relate to each other. So if the biceps contracts, the triceps relaxes, and vice versa. Okay. Now let's move on to some creature designs. I'm gonna just take a screenshot here, post them here so I can grab the colors. Shift S. And then let's hop into the cat. Okay, so this is just a speed sculpt that I did. It's, done in an evening roughly, and I just kind of mixed cat anatomy with some human anatomy. But let's go through and break this down a bit, right? So let me just fill the cat with white first. All right. So as you can see, I think this one's pretty easy to watch or observe. It's the deltoid muscle, right? You have this massive chunk of a deltoid over here. You technically don't have a biceps on a cat. In this case, you kind of do because it's not an anatomically accurate cat. But on normal cats, you have a brachio... I forget the full name of it, but what it does is it goes over this, actually, and it goes all the way and connects to the back of the head. So it's actually a pretty huge muscle. If you look at some cat references, you'll be able to see that. But in this case, I did humanize the anatomy quite a bit over here, right? So should be fine. Here we have some pec muscles. Whoops, wrong brush. Some pec muscles. We get some triceps, which on a cat does the majority of the work, right? It's where most of the power comes from, actually, are these huge tricep muscles. You get some extensors over here, some flexors. I'm not going to mark the tiny ones here, like I think it's the pronator teres over there, but I'm just focusing on the large groups, right? You can kind of see a latissimus. It would technically be kind of like this, right? And I think it's important to keep in mind that you can stay flexible with anatomy. I think anatomy should be used as a tool. You should have fun with it as well. I don't think it's fun when you measure every muscle and keep the exact same relationship, because ultimately we're designing fantasy creatures, right? So you need to be aware that what you're designing doesn't exist. So your only purpose is to really make it look like it exists. However, it still doesn't exist, right? So we certainly have some flexibility there. The more grounded you want it to look, obviously, be very pedantic and scientific about your anatomy. However, I do think if you do too much of that, you can just kind of water down the design as well, right? So it's important to kind of balance those two, right? Walk the thin line between realism, science, and fantasy to make something also look interesting. So this part here is interesting because on cats, essentially, you have this massive foot, right? If this was a human, this is not the lower foot over here, or the lower leg, I mean. This is all foot. So the ankle technically starts over here, right, on these two bones, and then goes down, and this is essentially like the end of the foot, and then these are kind of like the digits. So that's interesting to keep in mind, right? That's already where you see kind of like a variation of how proportions differ between creatures. All right, let's move to something simpler. Again, I'm not showing you guys the specific, study this scientifically. What I'm showing you guys is just a quick breakdown things to keep in mind, right? So this obviously much easier than a cat, right? If you have a primate, very, very similar to humans, you get that. Here you can really see like the brachioradialis as well, the triceps, right? The general arm anatomy, pretty much the same. So you can just model a human and, you know, put him in his crouching position, and you basically can make something already, you know, look like a primate. Of course, the hands are kind of different, but I think you kind of get the idea as well, right? Let's color this in. Here you'd have the bone kind of showing through, so I think I can push this even further. Something like that. Now, bones are usually important landmarks. Not usually, like actually always. They are always important landmarks. Here you have the scapula. You can kind of see it popping out, and it kind of would go like this, right? Comes down over here. Here you kind of would have the hip bone, right? So bones, I think, are the most important to know, right? What are your landmarks for the bones? That one would be kind of here, right? The wrist over here. You get the olecranon and I think it's the radius popping out. And let's mark the obliques. The latissimus. You kind of get a bigger trapezius, attaches to the scapula, right, and goes up here. Big muscle. I think this would still be like deltoid. Then you would have some serratus, but I didn't really sculpt those here. Don't tell anyone. Get some chest muscle. Also, again, these are like speed sculpts. They were done in like a day or two. The focus is always on something different, but I think you get the idea, right? For a production model, usually you need to pay more attention to anatomy and stuff because it will be used by animators, right? Or riggers for muscle simulations and whatnot. In VFX, in games, not so much, but in games also, you know, riggers do like to know where the muscles are. It should be nice and obvious for them. And yeah, abductors, even on animals like these, you do have abductors usually around here, right there to pull the leg in. And yeah, roughly color coded. All right.